All right, hi everybody. I know you guys were expecting initially Dr. Borders and Dr. Jones-Bach. They both had previous commitments at ISU, so you guys are stuck with me today. Couple of things about me. I got my undergraduate at Illinois State in deaf education. Then I got my master's at Vanderbilt in deaf education. And now I'm getting my doctorate in special ed with Dr. Jones-Bach and Dr. Borders. So when they saw they had other commitments, they recruited me to present today. All right, so a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. Just a brief background of deaf ed, some studies out there, evidence-based practices. Then we're going to jump into sensory disabilities and then teaching strategies, and then you guys can go home. Okay, so what is the purpose of today? Is to describe the current population and what we can do with them. As many of you probably have kids with multiple needs in your classroom and had little training, or the training you have done is things like this, or you have gone on the websites and looked for things, and there's an abundance of websites, but they don't really tell you what to do. And that's kind of where in my first year of teaching, that's where I got stuck. I had a little girl with hearing loss and autism, and I was trying everything just to find research on deaf with autism, and it's non-existent. There's little research, but there's not much. So that's really what pushed me into getting my doctorate. Also, there's a variety of different terms. So today we're talking about sensory disabilities. I know there's some vision people in here. So sensory disabilities with disabilities. So there's a bunch of different terms. There's like deaf plus, deaf with additional disabilities, but right now what we're trying to say is deaf with disabilities. And my assumption would be, vision impairment with disabilities. And the reason to that is deaf plus is like you're adding something on, but that's not always the case. Some of the symptoms are the same, they're just more complicated. All right, so this is for hearing loss. This is the prevalence of additional disabilities in our classrooms. So they're saying about 40 to 50%, which is half of our kids have an additional factor. And many of us went to college or undergrad in our master's program, and we learned about those vanilla deaf kids. We didn't learn about the deaf with disabilities. This shows what kind of disabilities there are. So about 65% of teachers are teaching kids with autism, and then it goes down the line. So like I said just a minute ago, 40% of our students have hearing loss with disabilities. And this number is presumed to be low because it's very hard to diagnose a secondary disability. And I'm assuming that is the same with vision. Once you have vision, you don't know, or hearing loss, you don't know, is it a hearing loss thing or is this something else? Then 1 in 76 of these children are receiving services for both a hearing loss and autism. So like I said before, there's a lot that we don't know, but 1 in 76 is very few of our kids who are getting the appropriate services that they need. In 2012, hearing loss with autism was 1 in 59. Typically developing was 1 in 68. This is in 2012. So hearing loss is more prevalent. Hearing loss and autism is more prevalent than typically developing children. Now in 2018, the CDC came out and said that hearing students is 1 in 59, but we don't have an updated number on hearing loss. But if the prevalence is increasing for kids with typically hearing, then chances are it's also increasing for our population of kids. So why does this matter? Why are we here? This is for us. The brain is plastic, it's moldable. We can rewire it, we can retrain it, we can reteach it. There are so many preconceived notions that we have about everything. But the really great thing is that we can retrain our brains and we can open ourselves up to better accommodate these kids. So Lanny Lawson, I went to her presentation a few weeks ago, and she talked about accountability and entitlement on a spectrum. And she was talking about if we act entitled, we are basically saying that child has autism, I don't know what to do, I'm not going to worry about it. Instead, we need to be accountable, and we got to say, okay, I'm willing to do the research, I'm willing to try things, I am accountable for this child as well. And the same goes for a bad home life, or parents that are uninvolved. Many times I shouldn't say we, I hope we're better than this, but a lot of times we resort, oh, that's a problem at home, that's something we can't fix. That's right, we cannot fix it, but we can also do something about it. We need to be accountable for things as well. We need to give the tools for kids to be successful. So more on accountability. When teachers hear something about a student such as autism, ADHD, bad home life, their internal verbal mindset may change. We are programmed from our own experiences. If we've had bad experiences with these certain situations, when we see a future situation, our brain automatically goes back to that. So that's why we can retrain our brains. If you believe a kid is bad, they will be bad. You'll find everything wrong. We need to take accountability for our students, and we have the ability to change behaviors. We can be accountable. There is no such thing as a good or a bad kid. They're all kids. So sensory impairments with additional disabilities. Teachers of the deaf face the challenge of teaching an increasingly complex population of students. Like I said before, half of our population is complex. Students with a dual diagnosis of deaf or hard of hearing and autism exhibit clinically significant behaviors that interfere with their ability to learn. How many of you are dealing with behaviors? A lot of you. If a student receives an initial diagnosis of deaf or hard of hearing, and this goes for vision as well, or vision, and is later found to have autism, they'll most likely still be educated through the vision lens or the deaf or hard of hearing lens. Like I said before, only 1 in 76 are getting services for both. And then the opposite is also true. If a child is diagnosed with autism first and then hearing loss later, they'll typically tend to receive services just for autism and not the hearing loss. And then lower levels of functional communication equal higher levels of inappropriate or atypical behaviors. And this is just because they're trying to communicate to us. All right, if you're gonna listen to anything today, this is the slide to listen to. It typically takes a typical developing child 3 times to hear something before they learn it. It takes a child with autism 70 times to hear something before they learn it. It takes a child with hearing loss 40 to 70 times to hear something before they learn it. Then if you add hearing loss with autism, it takes them over 120 times before they'll learn something. So when you think something's not working, but you've only done it 50 times, you might have to do it another 70 times. So what are our evidence-based practices? This is just using research to inform our practice. We provide a coherent chain of understanding. There's lots of replication. So in order, if someone comes out with the intervention and they think that it's going to work for everyone, they can't just make it an evidence-based practice. It has to go through several steps of it works with this student in a control study, then they have to replicate it, and then they have to generalize it to other populations before it is considered evidence-based. And then there's a lot of pressure from the government, federal and state and districts for teachers to provide evidence-based practices. And this is really challenging for our population of kids, vision and deaf and hard of hearing, because we're low incidence. So we don't have a lot of generalization. We don't have large-scale studies. So it's very hard to make things evidence-based. What can evidence-based practices do? They can increase behaviors, academic tasks. A child can start to learn to read, to write, communication skills, verbal and nonverbal skills, higher cognitive functions, the executive functioning, understanding that X, if I have to do X, then that will lead to Y. Interpersonal skills, understanding empathy, understanding how to interact with someone. Learning readiness skills, motor skills, learning how to jump, walk, basic tasks. Personal responsibility tasks, showering, washing their hands, going to the bathroom, play skills, and self-regulation. Evidence-based practices, also a lot of people think of evidence-based practices to decrease behaviors. So the problem behaviors, the hitting, the spitting, the swinging of arms, the restricted, repetitive behaviors. And then a lot of teachers use evidence-based practices for sensory or emotional regulations. So what is an evidence-based practice? Or defining it. When teaching and supporting children who have a hearing loss and autism, the approach to each disability cannot be viewed without the consideration of the impact of the other. In 2005, there was a study done just to see how many studies were out there on deaf and hard of hearing, and there were 964, with only 22 being considered controlled studies, which is very few. Then for autism, over 50 years, there was 1,060, and 775 of these studies were considered controlled. So some of the evidence-based practices that we're going to talk about today that can be used with our population of kids are antecedent-based instruction, visual supports, functional communication training, video modeling, task analysis, prompting, and reinforcement. Overall, there's currently 27 evidence-based practices in the field of autism. And a lot of these can also be used with modifications and accommodations. All right, so these are the top are the few that are considered evidence-based for hearing loss. So we have bilingual, bicultural strategies. Those are considered evidence-based, but are they really for deaf and hard of hearing? Not really, but we use a lot of their strategies. Literacy instruction, there's tons out there about literacy instruction. Language instruction, and then audiological equipment. And then in the field of autism, there's modeling, shaping, prompting, and then language, speech, listening, and reading. How many, so you guys can turn to a neighbor and talk about how many of these you are using in your classroom now, if any. We use a lot of strategies that are considered evidence-based, but there is proof to show that they are effective, but they're not considered evidence-based practices. So I'll give you like a minute or two to see if you guys are using any of these in your classroom now. All right. How many of you guys are using these strategies in your classroom right now? A few of you. All right, we're going to talk about the bottom a little bit later. All right, so these are some studies that Dr. Borders and Dr. Jones-Bach did. And it was just looking at you guys in the field and your knowledge of evidence-based practices in the field of autism. So there was a wide variance of knowledge amongst teachers. If they were familiar, they didn't always feel comfortable. You guys might know what shaping means, but you're like, I'm not really comfortable doing it. Less than 50% of teachers had familiarity with behaviorally based interventions, and some were familiar with some evidence-based practices, but not all. And I feel like this would go for the same with vision. So then the second study was to look at how many of these teachers took classes in undergraduate or their master's level programs that focused on behavior management, additional disabilities, or academic and behavioral interventions. And almost all are less than 60%, which is, again, 50% of our population. So we really need more instruction on this stuff. How many of you had classes in behavior management? Oh, pretty good size. How many in additional disabilities? And how many in academic or behavioral interventions? Interesting. Yeah. When I went to ISU, I had a course in behavior management, but it was taught by a teacher of the deaf. So still things were kind of skewed a little bit more to that hearing loss instead of learning like evidence-based practices in general. And then the last study was out of Midwestern, and what they did was they looked at, I think, over 150 behavior plans. And this is what they found teachers using the most, or what they found interventions on the behavior plans. So teach, model, prompt, and reinforce, visual strategies, providing choices, routines and schedules, the ISRC library, social stories, reinforcement charts, data collection coaching, environmental changes, and sign language skills. And then the primary, so there was 132 plans that were analyzed. 67 had deaf and hard of hearing as their primary disability. 27 had autism as their primary disability, and 51 had other as their primary disability. All right. Prompting. How many of you know prompting? A few of you. All right. So most of us, when we teach, we use a least to most prompting. So if someone, I'm trying to think of a good example. So a child, I ask a child a question about what's the first letter in their name, and they don't say anything, and they just look at me. Then I might say the question again to give them repetition. They still don't say anything. I might give a prompt of like, well, my name starts with for Anna. What does Charlie start with? And then give that small little prompt. If they still don't get it, then I might say, ch, and then they'll give it back to me. So that's kind of moving through the models. You could give a picture, so I could write their name and say, what's the first sound? And that's the prompt by pointing to the CH. Then on the flip side is the most to least prompting. This is where it's hand over hand, and you help them with a full physical prompt, and then you work your way off those prompts up to natural. So this is if you're working on a child who's learning how to wash their hands, and they don't want anything to do with the sink. You might do the full model prompt, depending on their FBA. You might do a full model prompt where you hold their hands, you walk them to the sink, you you have them turn on the water, and then you wash their hands with them, and then you get the soap, and you go through the whole process. And then the next time, or a few times after that, you might do a partial, where you lead them over to the sink and then they can turn on the sink. Or maybe you have to help them turn on the sink, get the process started, and then you go to the sink next to them and you model and they imitate the model. And then hopefully you can work your way up to just showing them a picture. All right, Johnny, go wash your hands. They go over to the sink and wash their hands. So it's some teach, model, prompt, and reinforce strategies. So teaching requires progressively shaping, modeling, cueing, and eventually fading to increase the independent use of problem behaviors. So shaping is reinforcing closer and closer approximations to the desired behavior. So the example I just gave was if you got a child who's spitting and they're spitting on you and you want this to be done now, you're not going to stop it overnight. It's something that they've learned and they're getting reinforced because you're getting mad, you're sending them out of the room, they're getting time alone. So what you have to do is you have to shape that behavior. So maybe then it's spitting into a cup. And then maybe then you move into, okay, instead of spitting, I can ask for a break. I'm getting mad, instead of spitting on them, just basically request a break. Then they move into spitting in the cup, and then they point to a picture, I want a break. So modeling is just you demonstrating the correct behaviors. Cueing is when you want that desired behavior. So you see someone starting to get worked up, you might point to that I need a break card to help cue them to point to that break card. And then fading is, at first, a lot of these interventions, you're really reinforcing very, very often. So then fading those reinforcements and those prompts is just taking some of those prompts away or giving them more steps that they have to complete before you reinforce. So just some examples. So if you have any runners who, when they get mad, they run out of the room, you could start by shaping that behavior to one, just asking for a break. If that doesn't work, just constantly reinforcing those behaviors. All right, so think of a child that you have and a behavior that you want to get rid of. How can you teach it, shape it? And shaping could be as big or little, depending on the cognitive skills of your child. If you think they could do a bigger step, they might be able to. Or you might have to start really, really small. And then think about the behavior you would ultimately like them to be at. How are you going to shape that behavior? How are you going to teach? How are you going to model? How are you going to prompt that behavior? And how are you going to reinforce that behavior? So I'll give you guys like 5 minutes or so. All right, let's come back. Does anybody have an example that they would like to share? Anybody have a really tricky kid that they think this might work for? So I'm going to give you, this is for the video.
Currently we're working on it with a student who has like almost a...
Here we do. That's the room one. Okay. So you can hold both.
Thanks. Currently we're working with a student who has almost like a fixation with a gen ed student. And during lunchtime, she will consistently run up to the student and inappropriately touch her hair, get in her personal space. It's happening in unstructured times during the day. So we're currently trying to work with her on replacing the behavior. Instead of running up to her, maybe waving hello. So right now, we just started working on this. We're sort of coming up with visuals and that we could work with her in the time to eventually, in real time, or eventually the lunch aides and stuff will be able to give her natural cues that behavior is inappropriate.
Awesome. And to build on that, hold on one second. All right. And to build on that, you can, if, just going up to the peer and she still wants to touch them, she may understand that's inappropriate. You can always do something like a high five, or something we've implemented is like elbow fives, or they can choose how they interact with the child. So it's like elbow five, a hug, or like a high five.
Okay.
So it's still, so then you can always shape to that and then back off to just saying waving hello or.
One of the issues is that she's been making the gen ed peer increasingly uncomfortable. And we're sort of afraid that the gen ed peer just really wants no contact, and we sort of want to respect that too. So
Can you repeat the question and/or give her the microphone?
Yeah.
Our child is making the gen ed peer a little bit more uncomfortable than we want her to, and the gen ed peer is becoming more increasingly visibly annoyed with this behavior and increasingly uncomfortable. So we're kind of sort of backing off of the actual physical interaction in terms
Absolutely.
of the high five, and that would be ideal. However, I don't think that this peer wants that interaction at all. So
Right.
we would do wave hello or that
Yeah.
type of stuff. It might be a little more
Absolutely.
comfortable.
All right. I saw another hand.
So I currently have a totally blind student that is just been diagnosed with autism. She's in a regular first grade classroom, and she uses the most filthy language that I've had to look in the Urban Dictionary what some of the things mean. And so we are trying to let her express herself by expected and unexpected behavior, and she'll say that's the expected, that's the unexpected. It's to the point though it's escalating, that's not working, and she's not able to be in her regular ed classroom at all because she's MFing, and all of these poor little first grade students, their eyes are about to fall out of their head when they're hearing that. So I'm at a total loss. I made some tactile things in a bag that she could feel if she's angry. She could use, I use like a Brillo pad. She has a smooth fish for calm, but when it goes, and it's escalating to the point of yesterday it was 40 times in the first 2 hours of school. So I'm here for help. We're really trying.
So a lot of that is if there might be something like the function to that behavior. Why is she saying that stuff? Is she saying it for attention? And we'll talk about functions of behavior later. But if she's seeking pure attention, how else can she seek that pure attention? Or is she requesting an escape? If I say all these words, I'm removed from the room. So there's
We're looking for antecedents, and we have not found a true pattern of why she's moving into that stage.
So she said they're looking at all the antecedents and they haven't seen a clear pattern yet. Yeah, so just the more you do the ABC kind of chart, you should be able to see, or just throughout the day, what does she seek? Does she seek pure attention? Does she seek teacher's attention? Does she seek something tangible? Is she seeking escape? It might not be clear yet, but with consistent data. And sometimes it's not always clear, and sometimes you just have to play around with different things, like I need a break card, or to shape up behavior from saying inappropriate language. Are there other words that you can teach her that?
Trying to connect these tactile manipulatives to a feeling that she might want to express. She's very verbal.
So she said she's using tactile items to express how she feels. Yes.
I'm sure since you're dealing with this, you've probably thought of it, but a lot of times when it's hard to find an antecedent, maybe it's an internal antecedent, something that she's feeling and experiencing that you can't see. Like if it's happening a lot in the morning, maybe it has to do with the transition and she's not, acting out immediately enough that you can associate it with the fact that it's the start of the day or nervousness about the day, but maybe just thinking along those lines, like what could be happening internally that's making her react. I don't know.
Looking at the data, it is throughout the day.
Okay.
So we're trying to figure out if there was something like, is she in a classroom with somebody's voice that she's not
Right.
connected to, or
Yeah, And we'll talk a little bit more about the sensory in a little bit. Yeah. It's tricky, and a lot of it is trial and error. You know, it would it would be easy if everybody fit into a mold, but our kids don't. So it's trial and error. You know, things might seem they're not working, but maybe you might be turning a corner, and then you do it for another 3 weeks, and it's like, okay, we got to try something different. All right. So you guys all know the diagnosis, basically the process to diagnose a hearing loss or a vision loss. But it is super hard to diagnose the additional disability. One, parents might be in denial and they might want no part. Every time you bring up there's some behavior problems, they might be like, nope, my child's fine, my child can pay attention, they're cool. And it's just really, sometimes really hard to get that ball rolling. Also, there's so many symptoms that overlap, and it's like, is this a hearing loss thing? Is this a vision thing? Or is this truly something else? So this just shows, oh, you can't really see it. It's supposed to be a Venn diagram. So hearing loss, the delays, autism, the delays, but in the middle, it says communication. There's a lot of overlap between autism and hearing loss and the communication breakdown and the communication barriers. Language development, both can be impacted through autism and hearing loss. And then socialization can be impacted, but it might be a hearing loss thing, it might be an autism thing, it might be both. It's really hard to differentiate. All right, so we all have sensory needs. And I forgot to tell you, the Play-Doh is for you to play with. I completely forgot. So the Play-Doh is to meet your sensory needs if you need to while we're talking throughout this presentation. So let's talk about your kids. But before we do that, there's a sensory profile that we have printed out for you. Just briefly go through it. Think about your own sensory needs and everything that impacts you throughout the day. And then keep in mind what your kids might be impacted by. All right, did everyone get a chance to look over the sensory profile? There's a lot of things that are sensory related. So why, when I was making this, I was like, we're going to talk about sensory because if the sensory needs are not being met, we could throw all our interventions out the window. Because if I was teaching you right now and you had a really itchy sweater on and the lights were flickering and there was someone clicking a pen in your ear, how frustrated would you be? Pretty frustrated. Probably some of you would be like, I'm out of here, and you would escape, right? So some of our kids, they don't know how to regulate their sensory needs. So that's what they do. They present behaviors that might look like a lack of communication, or they might look like something else, but just simply because something is overstimulating them or they're overly aggressive when they hug someone, or they're always bumping into things, or they're always pushing a friend. That's not necessarily defiance. They might be trying to meet a sensory need. So these are all the different places, all the different sensory systems that we have. Olfactory, which is our sense of smell. Visual, tactile, auditory, proprioceptive, vestibular, and gustatory. I always say it wrong. Gustatory. That's our sense of taste. So our skin is the biggest, right? That's our sense of touch. Then the rest go around. But if one of these sensory systems is off, there's a diagram later, but basically it's a pyramid. And at the bottom is all our sensory systems. And if one of those is not working, the whole pyramid might be shifted or might be a little bit broken. All right, so think about the places that you work best or that you learn best. Do you learn best with a little bit of music? Do you learn best in the quiet? Do you learn, the best in a coffee shop? Think about when you were an undergrad or in a master's program. Were you the one who was able to go to the coffee shop and work and you needed that distraction? Your senses are telling you that's what you do to work best. For me, I could go to a coffee shop because I need that noise, but I'm so easily distracted that I'll just watch people all day and I won't do any work. So just think about what your own senses and sensory needs are. So olfactory is our sense of smell. There's an arrow, you cannot see it, to the sense of smell. So this is our oldest sense that our brain processes. When you smell something, it instantly triggers memories. It instantly triggers reactions. If you smell something good, every time I smell chocolate chip cookies, I think of my grandma's house. But there are some smells that I smell and I think's a very adverse reaction. Also, some of our students have very heightened senses. So for most of us, our sensory system is typically functioning. We can filter out things. I don't like that smell, but I could still sit here and listen. Some kids, they might be like, I do not like that person's perfume smell, and I need to get away from it. So there's lots of things when senses come into play that for kids with sensory processing, or not even just a little bit of a dysregulation of senses, everything is heightened to them. Or it might be the opposite. You might have the kid opening the expo markers or the permanent markers and smelling them because they are hyposensitive to smell. They don't smell as well, so they're seeking strong smelling things. Okay, so hypersensitive kids might find anything overpowering. They might find your perfume, they might find your shampoo overpowering. You might be surprised at all the things that these kids can smell. They might show extreme aversive reactions to odors or some substances, and they might not use a toilet. But that's not because of anything else, it's just because they cannot stand the smell, or they might not be able to stand the smell of like the Lysol in the bathroom or the Clorox wipes that we use. Then on the flip side, the kid who is hyposensitive, they're seeking a lot of things. So they may be smelling things obsessively. They might seek those strong odors like those permanent markers or the expo markers. Do any of you guys have kids who are probably hypo or hypersensitive with smell? Yeah. So gustatory, this is the sense of taste. So many of us like food, but there are certain foods that we can't eat because we don't like the taste. Our taste is in conjunction with our smell. When your nose is stuffy, can you taste things as well? No. So, but also a lot of kids use their mouths to make up for a sense that they don't have. So if a kid has a vision loss or a hearing loss, so we have a student right now who has a vision loss and a hearing loss, and everything goes in their mouth. But they're probably trying to feel what they're trying to give them that sensory input that they're not getting otherwise. So when you see some of these behaviors, think about, could it be a sensory thing? Kind of like your example, could it be a sensory thing, or is it something that's like a behavior, a function of a behavior? Also textures. Lots of things that we eat have a ton of textures. Some of us like to eat applesauce, some of us think is not, the texture is just not good. For me, I did a ton of running, and I ate hard-boiled eggs like it was nothing. and now I can't stand the smell or the taste because I ate so many. So think about yourselves, think about your own sensory needs, and then think about what your kids may be. Oh, there's the arrow. There we go. Okay. Hypersensitive, they might be your poor eaters. They might be the kids who only eat white bread. They might be the kids who only eat goldfish because it's a little bit more bland, or it just doesn't have the texture like other foods do. They might use only the tip of their tongue when eating. They can't stand their whole tongue, or they can't stand food in their whole mouth. They might gag or vomit easily, and they might only crave certain foods. So a lot of kids with autism crave white bread, that kind of diet, very simple, and they really have a hard time eating things outside of them. Then your hyposensitive kids, they eat everything. They eat the dirt on the floor, they eat everything, they put everything in their mouths. They lick everything. It's very bizarre and is a disgusting behavior, but they're trying to give them the input that their body needs. They might eat mixed foods, several tastes and combinations. A lot of people like the sweet and salty. A hypersensitive kid might hate a sweet and salty. A hyposensitive kid might want hot sauce on everything because all of a sudden they can taste or they can feel something. And then they regurgitate. Tactile. So this is our skin is our biggest sensor in our body. I'll get the arrow this time. Okay. This helps us tell us things are too hot, things are too cold. That's going, if you pinch something, it tells you pain. So our kids who are hyposensitive, they're the ones who fall nonstop and never express pain. Then our hypersensitive kids might bump into the table and scream. And they might not be being dramatic, it might really hurt. And just because their sense of touch is so sensitive. These are also, think about all the clothes that you wear. You might choose certain clothes that are okay for you to wear. Someone might always wear cotton. The other person might hate cotton. A kid might seek something that's tight. Other kids like things that are loose. Some kids just cannot wear certain kinds of shoes. They can't wear socks, or vice versa. They might need that tactile input. They might be seeking shoes that have bumps on the bottom that give them that input. We have a student that this summer was expressing that his shoes were biting him. So think about the entire day. If you were wearing something that was itchy and painful to you all day, would it be easy to learn? No. So our hypersensitive kids in the tactile system, they don't like to be touched. They avoid getting messy. They have some eating issues. They hate taking showers. They hate people touching them. They don't want anyone doing their hair. They might struggle to get a haircut. Temperatures and pain, they might be super sensitive. If it's cold in a room, they might be super sensitive. If it's warm in a room, discomfort with clothing, we talked about that. Hyposensitive, high pain tolerance, they're always falling and they never say anything, they're not crying. Even when something looks like it should hurt, they're not doing anything. They like that deep pressure, those weighted vests, they like to be hugged. They're seeking, they bump off of walls, they bump into friends, they push friends. They're seeking sensory. They seek rough and tumble. They're prone to self-injury, low reaction to temperature and pain. They might touch a hot oven to seek that, sensory input, and they might not realize until it's too late that it's very, very hot. they same thing. They might put a ton of things in their mouths. They might lick things. And they're constantly touching people and things. And it's the most annoying thing because you say 500 times, please stop touching Johnny, please stop touching Johnny, please stop touching Johnny. And they're still touching them, but they're seeking that sensory input. Visual. So I'm a very clean person. And when I so visual, my place is very clean. Everything has its place. It's very, there's not clutter everywhere. Every time I go to my parents' house, I have a heart attack because there's just clutter everywhere. So I struggle in their house. So think about our kids, think about our classrooms. This kind of floor is super difficult for a child with visual sensory. They might get dizzy. They might not be able to know how to maneuver this. It might be overwhelming. So just think about your classrooms. Think about the settings we're putting our kids in. If you're itinerant, you might be going into the janitor's closet, right? And there's toilet paper everywhere. And some of those things are just really hard for a child to process. They can't focus on, the A says ah, because my brain is so overwhelmed by everything that I'm seeing. So are hypersensitive. They don't like the dark or bright lights. They're frightened by sharp flashes of lightning, and they may look down a lot to block out the excessive stimulus. So if there's a funky light that is flashing, they will have a really hard time processing that out, filtering that out, where many typically developing people were able to filter that out and still be able to focus. And then our hyposensitive, they're attracted to light. They're constantly just staring at the light. They stare intensely at objects and people, and they're fascinated by shadows and reflections. Is this resonating with anybody? Anybody have kids that you might be able to look at them differently due to their senses? All right, auditory. So this is our ability to hear. Like I said earlier, if someone's clicking a pen in your ear, you might be able to focus. I can focus better if I have like background noise or TV on or a coffee shop. Some people cannot. Think about if we went to a rock concert and then I was trying to teach you how to make an IKEA bed. It would be pretty difficult. Some people the hyposensitive might need that loud noise to focus. Hypersensitive would be like, absolutely not, get me out of here. So hypersensitive, unable to filter out those noises. They avoid sounds and noises. They don't like crowds, they don't like storms, they don't like loud music. Self-care tasks are difficult, and they may use their own voice to drown out the environmental noises, because at least if they're talking, they can hear themselves and they don't hear the constant chatter or things that are going around them. Hyposensitive, they seek those noisy environments. They like to make noise, and then they make loud, rhythmic noises. All right, we got like 3 more slides, then we'll take a break. Vestibular. This is your sense of movement and balance and position in space. So this is all in your inner ear. A lot of the kids with hearing loss, their inner ear has been damaged or it doesn't work the same way, meningitis, a variety of different things. So their vestibular system might be off. Their balance might be off. So this system tells us if we're going too fast, if we're going too slow, the amount of proprioceptive is the amount of pressure to put on things, but vestibular is just that ability to understand how you move in space. So our hypersensitive, they might be fearful. They might have fearful reactions to, ordinary movements. They might have difficulty walking or crawling. They don't like being upside down. That just throws everything off. They become anxious or distressed when their feet leave the ground. And then our hyposensitive love swings, merry-go-rounds. They might be, but to a point that you're almost like, okay, we've been on the swing for 2 hours now, we need to get off. They might spin, run. We have our kids who just spin all the time, and they never, ever, ever get dizzy. And then the kids who rock back and forth. What I should mention is you might have kids who are hypersensitive in some and hyposensitive in others. Proprioceptive. This tells us where our body is in space, how much pressure to put on things. Think about driving a car. If you had to look at the gas pedal to see how much you were pushing, it would be very difficult to drive. We just know that. We're able to feel that with our leg, and our brain is able to regulate how much to push on the gas, how much to push on the brake to drive. Some of these kids bump into things, push people. They don't understand how much force they're exerting. So our hypersensitive, they might place their body in strange positions. They might turn their whole body when looking, and they might have difficulty manipulating small objects. Our hypo, low muscle tone, they might have a hard time getting off the floor. They might have a hard time sitting crisscross applesauce. They might sit with their body like in an awkward position and then get up that way because it's easier. They have a lack of awareness of their body in space. They're all over their friends. They have a tendency to fall, and then they also like to rock back and forth. Okay. All right, so a lot of our kids, as we went through, have different things. Even a lot of us have different sensory needs that are going on. So now, we, typically developing, are able to process all of this, and we're able to integrate everything and understand everything, and then process it and filter out the things that we don't need. So you can't really see the diagram, but first how the sensory processing goes is first is registration, then is orientation, interpretation, organization of a response, and then execution of a response. So we'll dive a little bit more into this on the next slide. But just think about your students and the things that they might be exhibiting. You might have a student, that never wears socks to school, and you always just thought the parents weren't putting socks on them. It might be a true sensory thing. All right, so there's like a step. The first is registration, and this is the initial awareness. So the initial awareness that there's something going on across the hallway. You hear it, you don't really do much about it, or if you see a bee, kind of flying around, not really bothering you yet. Orientation. This is when you start to pay attention to that, and you start to listen, or you start to notice the bee is coming really close to you. Interpretation. This is all kind of our prior experiences. So like I said earlier, most of our reactions are based on prior experiences. If you have been stung by a bee, chances are your interpretation can be different than someone that's never been stung by a bee. If you're allergic to bees, your interpretation and your organization of a response is going to be very different than someone who's never been stung by a bee. So this is just everything that occurs throughout the day, all the lights the things that you're wearing, the things that you hear, the things that you smell, your body, your brain is able to register it, orient itself, choose if it's important or not, and then execute a response. Now, our children who are hypersensitive or hyposensitive might do things differently to seek out those sensory needs. So they might escape a room because all they hear are people chattering, or all they hear or all they see are bright lights. Their ladder basically is a little bit, I don't want to say broken, but it's different. Their execution and organization of a response is going to be different than others. So this is the final stage, and this is how they respond. And then after they respond, the whole process starts again. But their execution of a response is their interpretation of their own sensory system. All right, that is not supposed to be green. It's supposed to look like a wonderful Thanksgiving meal. So when we're sitting at Thanksgiving and there's a beautiful platter of food and we can smell it, we can see it, we hear the people chattering around us, we're sitting on a chair, our proprioceptive system knows how much to sit on the chair, knows to sit up, not slouch, not lay on the table. We have a lot going on constantly, and our brains are able to filter all that stuff and tune into what's important. Okay, I'm going to execute a response to this smell. I really like this smell, so I'm going to grab some of this food. There's different executions of different responses. A child who has a faulty, almost like a faulty filter or a faulty understanding of their sensory processing, this is super difficult. They might be overwhelmed by all the food on the table. It might be hard to process. All the noise might be really difficult. They might want to go to someplace quiet. They might find the food aversive. They might find the smell of it aversive. Maybe the person next to them is wearing a new perfume. They don't like that perfume. All of these things can be super heightened, and someone might not be able to know how to filter out those different senses. All right, so this is the pyramid that you cannot see that I mentioned earlier, but basically the bottom is all the sensory processing, or senses, all the 7 senses that we went through before. So if this part of the pyramid is gone, the whole pyramid's going to be a little tilted. Of typically functioning with a good sensory system and self-regulation, the pyramid functions correctly. And at the top is intellect and cognition. And then, so that's at the very top of the pyramid. And the next one is our motor skills and our development. Below that is our sensory motor skills. So our sensory systems dictate how the rest of the systems function, our cognition and everything. And that's when I mentioned before, if we don't focus on what sensory needs our students need, we might as well not look at the evidence-based practices, because if our sensory needs are not being met, they're not going to be able to pay attention or learn. So a healthy sensory processing, our brain takes in and registers all this information, like I said, at the Thanksgiving table. When it's disordered, our brain is unable to process this information, and then it might overregulate and everything's heightened, or it might be under-regulated. So for someone who has overregulation, they might be frightened easily, they might escape, or they might fight back. They might hit people because they don't know what to do. Then our under-registration is our sensory-seeking kids. They're the ones who are always bumping into things. They're always putting things in their mouth. They're smelling the markers. And it's because they're trying to seek sensory. Kids who have under registration, they may look like they're not paying attention. They may look like they're not focused, and they might have attention anxiety. So how does this affect our students? Our brains know how to filter out everything, but our kids might have faulty filters. They might be more alert, they might be less alert. Their arousal levels, if someone comes close to them or someone bumps into them, they might swing back. That might have felt like that hurt to them. And then they might be hyposensitive to a variety of different things. Okay. True or false? Signs of sensory processing issues can appear as early as infant or toddler stages. 1 for true, 2 for false. True. True or false? A child who has difficulty sitting still during circle time and is rolling around on the floor is always seeking attention. 1 is true, 2 is false. 2 is false. They might need that sensory input to attend to the speaker. But so many classrooms, how many of these kids are getting in trouble? True or false? A child who is chewing on clothing may be overstimulated within their environment and is using chewing to soothe themselves. True, 1 is true, 2 is false. 1, true. Yes, they might be totally overwhelmed with everything that is happening during circle time or that calendar time, and it's like their fidget. It's like their a cush ball that they can squeeze. True or false? A child who is experiencing sound sensitivities may have difficulty in environments such as the grocery store, mall, cafeteria, or school assembly. 1 is true, 2 is false. 1 is true. Yes, these kids might hear everything and they're not able to filter out all that noise, and that's all they can fixate on. They can't even see or attend to the things in front of them because everything sounds so loud to them. And then the last one, true or false? Most children will grow out of sensory processing issues. 1 is true, 2 is false. This is a tricky one. 2 is false. And that is, you will not outgrow sensory processing, but there are things that you could put into place to help them process those things better. So, you know, that if that's the cush ball, if that's a scoop chair, there's lots of different things. You can't see this picture. There's 2 little kids that say, "Do you know me?" And then they say all the sensory things that bug them. So think about your own students and looking at this sensory profile. How well do you actually know your students? What sensory things might they be seeking? It might look like a behavior. It might actually be something sensory. All right, so here's a video. It's going to be hard to see. All right. You think that's easy to function or hard to function? Yeah, so that's how some of our students feel. Everything is heightened, everything is super bright. They don't know how to filter out those different things. Okay, let's go back to this. As you can tell, technology is not my thing. Okay, so what you need to know, kind of going back to our students before, they might be exhibiting behaviors, and it might not always be due to a function, or I'm sorry, they always are due to a function, but it might not be that they're seeking attention. It might not be that they're seeking, something tangible. Their sensory needs might not be being met. So think about a student. I'll give you 5-10 minutes. Think about a student. Think about their potential triggers. Could these potential triggers or behaviors be addressed through you implementing something else? Maybe it's a chair that they're sitting on. Maybe it's the lights in your room. So, and then what can you do to change the things in your classroom? So I'll give you like 5-10 minutes to think about a student and how you can help them. All right, so our ultimate goal is to reduce or get rid of these meltdowns or these behaviors through sensory input. So if you know the potential triggers, then you'll be better apt to accommodate those needs before something escalates. With a student at the school I'm at, we put in a bunch of interventions in place, and they seem to work a little bit, but it wasn't until we started adding sensory time to his day. And we added 4 sensory times where it's just his time. He has a menu of items. He does whatever he needs to, regulate his senses, and then he could come back to the task. So just think about that with your own kids. All right, we kind of talked a lot about this, but common triggers. The sound's too loud, there's too much background noise, there's an unexpected loud noise, or, we work with kids and recess, there's lots of shouting, there's clapping, there's cheering, there's lots of noises that might be all hard to regulate and process. Touch, if a student bumps into them, that might be painful for them. Smell, strong odors. Taste, they might be picky. They might not want anything to do with lunch or eating. Sight, things are too bright. The lights are flashing. Fluorescent lights. Some children hear the buzzing in the lights that might trigger something for them. And movement. They might be sensitive to people moving, their own movement. And a lot of these kids, they might, fight or flight. So accommodating these students. Okay, I want you to think of ideas that you can do on your own, but now here's a bunch of accommodations that you can do in your own classroom. Sound, if they're hypersensitive, you could give them headphones. You can move them away from the noisy environment to someplace quiet. You can allow the student to be a spectator versus a participant. If they have a hard time participating in the activity, maybe they can just watch. If you need to remove them completely, you can. They could request a break. And then you could foreshadow. So you could talk, if a child is able and has the language, you could talk them through, okay, we're going to go to the grocery store, it's going to be loud, this is what might happen, and just kind of forewarn them and then give them the strategies that they can use to cope. Touch, I forgot. Does anybody want to share one of their students before I dive too far into this?
Oh, I don't need a microphone. Thank you.
This one's for the video.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, I'll speak quieter. Okay.
And then this one's for the room.
Oh, my goodness. I feel so special. I had I was just sharing with my colleagues, I had a high school student, and he was a freshman, and he became very anxious in the class. It was big, it was noisy. He would just be overstimulated and basically sit down and start to cry. So what we did was he would get very upset right when the teacher was about to assign homework. So I worked with the teacher. We gave him what I would do was tell him ahead of class, today we're going to have homework. This is what we're going to do. So then when the teacher assigned it, he didn't get all upset. And when the class just got too much for him, we came up with his little escape, and he would come up to me and say, Miss M, I need water.
Perfect.
So when he would go for water, I would watch him in the hallway, and he would get water, and then he would kind of walk up and down the hallway a little bit, and then he would calm himself down, and we would go back into the room. And also what started bothering him were the bells, because the bells ring every 50 minutes. So I would have to go up to him about 5 minutes before and let him know, okay, I almost said his name, but okay, Johnny Depp, in 5 minutes, the bell's gonna ring. So I just want you to know that. Don't get upset. Do you wanna leave now? You know, and then we worked on it. And by the end of the year, it worked out really well because of the transition just from 8th grade to a huge high school.
Noisy high school.
Yeah, because he went to a high school with 4,500 students. So, yeah, so those are the things we did for him.
That's awesome.
But it worked out really well.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So you guys used the foreshadowing and then just that I need a break card.
I need water.
I need water, yes. Anybody else want to share before I clip this back on? Okay. So how can we accommodate students with touch? We could foreshadow. We could forewarn them, you know, okay, I'm going to put my hand on your shoulder. I'm going to hold your hand as we walk down the hallway. If we just grab our students, sorry, hold on one second. This might be painful to them, and they might then get frightened, and they might run. Allow them to sit or stand. I saw someone over here talking about a student that they allowed to stand. If it's not detrimental and they're still paying attention, it doesn't matter. They can stand. Smell. Watch their responses. Smell is a tricky one because there's only so much you can control. But if it's something aversive that they're smelling that's maybe on you or your room or your perfume that you're wearing, just watch these different things. Sight. Offering sunglasses. Warning them about a dramatic change. I'm going to turn off the lights now, or I'm going to turn on the lights now. For us, it's hard when we go from a dark room and then all of a sudden we turn on the lights. So think about a child who is hypersensitive. This is even harder for them. Movement. Respect how they want to move, if they want to be a participant or if they want to be a spectator. Let's not force them into participating if they have a hard time with that movement. And then offer an alternate activity. Other general accommodations that you can use. If you know something works for your students, have it all the time. If it's in only one room and all of a sudden you go to the gym and now you don't have those noise canceling headphones, chances are they're going to become overwhelmed and fight or flight. So make sure you have the tools in your toolbox with you at all times. And then, like I said before, avoid the touch. But like I said in the earlier slide this morning, sometimes the most to least prompting is the best way to teach a student. But if a student has sensory where their touch is hypersensitive, that might not be the best approach. So there's lots of things to take into consideration. Other things, if you realize they're becoming really fidgety, things that we do, we start to kick our leg, we play with Play-Doh, we take a small mental break, we look at our phones. There's different things that we do to cope. These kids don't necessarily know how to cope, so we have to teach them, okay, I need a break. And then from there, then we could build on different skills. When you're in this setting and it's too loud, you could put on headphones. Or if it's too bright, you can ask the teacher to dim the lights if possible. Or there's other strategies that we can put in place. If you notice a student is beginning to escalate and is not responding to your request, stop talking. Try to do things non-verbally. The more that we are talking and the more that we're getting in their face and trying to get their attention, do you think that's helping sensory input, or you think it's making it worse? It's making it worse. And then give them clear one-step directions. You could prompt. These are all things that you might have to teach, you might have to shape. You might have to teach them about a break card, or I need a drink of water. There's different strategies that you could put in place to teach those students to better cope with their sensory needs. Any questions now that we've covered sensory before we move into behavior? Good? Okay. So once you have the sensory figured out, then we can move into behavior. All right, so when thinking about behavior, there are several things that we need to take in consideration. Behaviors serves a function, and there's 4 different functions that I'll go into. Behavior is communication. Behavior is reinforced in one way or another, and it occurs in all kinds of contexts. All right, so some behaviors, or some reasons for some behaviors, they might have a hard time communicating. You might be presenting only a restricted amount of activities that a teacher thinks they like to play with Play-Doh and they don't like to play with Play-Doh. So then they're going to exhibit a behavior. Emotional difficulties. They might have a hard time regulating their emotions. They might have a hard time with transitions. It might be hard for them to move throughout the day. Attention. They might have a unique cognitive profile. There's so many additional disabilities that present a variance of different things. And then sensory processing difficulties, which we talked a lot about this morning. And then there might be biological or medical factors. So behavior is communication. It's a form of communication, and they're trying to serve a function and get reinforced by doing something. So many children with autism communicate through behaviors rather than words and gestures. And I'll talk a little bit later about functional communication training later, which is instead of exhibiting a behavior like hitting someone or biting someone, they might be able to bring a picture to their friend and say, can you share with me? Behavior may be a response to the environment. So we talked a lot about how the environments sometimes that we're in are hard to process. A high school with 4,500 students is going to be hard, and there's going to be a lot of noise, and there's going to be a lot of kids bumping into each other. And then behavior might be due to sensory regulation difficulties. So how do we as teachers contribute to these behaviors? We tend to be inconsistent, and we think we're trying to help them, and we think we know these kids like the back of our hands, but we don't always do. We don't always know why they're exhibiting behaviors. We place these children in difficult learning academic environments that might be really hard on the student. And not only are they trying to pay attention, they might have an interpreter that they're trying to pay attention to, and then the student next to them might be distracting them. So we put a lot of pressure on these kids. We misinterpret the behaviors of individuals with developmental disabilities. So we might think it's autism, but it's really sensory, or vice versa. We might think it's something sensory related, but it's actually something communication related. We allow too much downtime because this is what a lot of our kids seek. They seek breaks, and then we're like, oh, they're being calm right now. Let's keep them here. And then we show our own stress and anxiety, and the kids can read us, and they understand us probably better than many people. And if they see we're stressed out, they're probably going to be stressed out too. All right, so before, when you're starting, you have a behavior and you're starting to figure out, okay, this is an adverse of behavior that really is not conducive to our classroom. You could start an FBA, which is a functional behavior analysis. And we talked a little bit this morning about your example with your student with vision loss and autism. Looking at antecedent, so you're recording tons of data on, okay, this happened right before the behavior. And then you're looking at the behavior, what the behavior was, you're recording that. And then you're recording what the consequence was. Consequence is also the reinforcement in some cases. So you're understanding what the function is for that student. And you're trying to figure out through those antecedents what they're trying to seek and why they're exhibiting the behavior. So function is associated with the student achieves by engaging in the problem behavior, what the payoff is. So what are the steps? I have so many pretty pictures that you guys can't see. So these are the steps, and you describe where it's happening. Is it the playground? Is it, the classroom? Is it the hallway? What the behavior is, and then the antecedents, what was happening right before. Was the hallway noisy? Was the classroom noisy? Was someone bumping into them? Then you'll identify the functions, which I'll go into next, and then what the behavior was, and then the consequence, which is typically what they got reinforced by, and then what you did to address that. It's all about data. Okay, so you have a child who's hitting. They might be trying to escape. They might be trying to get attention, and they might be trying to control a situation. So one of the examples this morning, the function of the girl's behavior is she probably wants attention from a peer. She's constantly touching that peer because she wants attention from them. So, and then attention might be throwing a pencil. A child might throw a tantrum, they might talk out, they might scream, they might, kick things, they might kick people, or they might just refuse to do what you want because now you're giving them attention and you're saying, okay, Sally, come on, and they still don't do it. You're giving them attention by prompting and trying to model the correct behavior. So the 4 different functions of behavior are sensory, escape, attention, and something tangible. So something tangible is something that they get, an actual reinforcer, a push ball, a prize from the prize box, something that they can hold or they receive. Attention is now all of a sudden I'm talking to you, I'm paying attention to you. Escape, they're gone, they're out of the classroom before you even know it. And then sensory, which we went into quite deeply this morning. So there's a student, he's hitting the SLP. What might he be seeking? He could be seeking all 4, right? But he really wants the SLP to pay attention to him. There's a group of 5 of them. And the SLP is paying attention to Joe and Johnny and Sally, but Rachel really wants the SLP to pay attention to her. So she starts to hit the SLP. She's trying to seek the SLP's attention. Do you think the SLP is just going to typically ignore her? No. She's going to turn and say, please stop hitting me. And now we just reinforced Rachel. She just got attention. Now, what do you think Rachel's going to do again? She's going to keep hitting. She's getting the SLP's attention. So we just really, the FBA is to really look at, okay, this is the antecedent, this is the behavior, and this is the consequence. And then from that FBA, we start to implement things. Maybe for Rachel, the SLP and Rachel meet for 5 minutes before the therapy session. And Rachel gets to tell the SLP all about her day. Now they sit in the therapy session and Rachel's not hitting. Rachel is seeking the attention. So this is kind of what I just talked about. If something is super loud and is super overwhelming and the child escapes the room, those are the things that you want to write down for the antecedent. It was noisy, it was loud, the child ran. It might be attention, but it also might be something sensory related. It might be escape. The functions of the behaviors can be a variety of different things. So we talked a little bit about this. So for sensory, we can address those sensory needs if we think our students have a couple of sensory needs. And a lot of that is just filling out their sensory profile to figure out, okay, my child likes this, my child doesn't like this. This might be triggering them in the classroom. And then we can also give them that sensory input that they're looking for before the class starts, or we could remove them from the room and give them that sensory input. So then when they go back to the class, they can focus and pay attention. Escape. They're trying to get away from whatever is the trigger. They might be aggressive when they're approached. They might cry because everything is overwhelming and they just need to leave the room. Or they might spit out food when they don't like it. They're trying to escape from eating that particular food. So things that we can do to help with this is using visuals, using breaks, using choices. And we have to start off small. Things aren't going to change overnight. So shaping that behavior. If you want, the student to stop spitting on you, then maybe is spitting into a cup, and so on. So attention. You think the child is looking for a reaction from you. That might be the little student in the first grade classroom. She might be seeking attention from her peers. Her peers might be giggling when she says all these profanity words. It may look like attention-seeking behaviors, and their attention, who knows what kind of attention they're getting at home. And then if they don't get a lot of attention at home, they might come to school and just seek a ton of attention at school. So maybe you start, and then that attention that they seek at school is hitting or swearing or biting a friend. So something that you could do is like talking to them in the morning, giving them the attention in a way that they will enjoy. If it's playing basketball with the kid and it's only you two and you play basketball for 5 minutes, or you have like a coffee chat, you start off the morning by talking to them. Any of these things might help with the attention. Do you guys have any attention-seeking kids? When we talk to the kids, trying to keep a neutral tone, not overreacting, they sense our stress. If we start to yell, we're probably going to stress them out and they will fight or flight. So tangible items, the student is looking for a reinforcement. So they really like the swing in the sensory room. And they will scream and play or scream and hit. And then what we tend to do is they'll scream and hit. Okay, let's go to the sensory room. They calm down on the swing. Now they've just been reinforced by the swing, and they've been reinforced by hitting and screaming. So we just have to be careful with what reinforcement we're giving them, and also just what their true function of the behavior is. To help with tangible items, the first then, so having a first then chart. First we need to do some work, then you can get the push ball. First we need to do this, then you can swing on the swing. Using timers, okay, you can do this for 3 minutes, then we gotta get back to work. And then we have to teach our children to request these preferred items, not just how they get it by exhibiting behaviors. All right, so different categories of behaviors. A lot of behaviors are distracting. Kids are wiggly. Kids are mumbling under their breath. They're talking, they're pacing. They look like they're tying their shoe and untying their shoe and tying their shoe and untying their shoe. They might be disruptive, they might be crying, they might be screaming. When a child is screaming, we typically remove them from the room. We might have just reinforced what they were looking for. They were looking to escape, now they're screaming, and now they get to escape. So typically we remove the student if they're really disruptive, but what we can do is we could teach, I need a break card. Then with that, they say, I need a break, they point to it, it's on their keychain. However, I need a drink of water. However that looks for your particular student. If they point to a picture, they can verbally say it, they can sign it. Or it could, for vision, it could be something in their pocket that they pull out. We have to reinforce those breaks. Because if we don't reinforce the breaks when they want them, then they're going to do it through a behavior. They're going to start screaming, they're going to start hitting, and then they'll get reinforced with their break. And then another category is dangerous behaviors, aggression, self-harm. So some behavior strategies. First we need to do this, then we need to do this. Redirecting with a replacement activity or behavior. Instead of denying the activity altogether, they want to blow bubbles by saying, no, not now. How about we try to color? You introduce something else that they like, but it's not giving them the preferred item that they want at that time. Extinction, ignoring the small annoying behaviors, and they will likely go away. This is not for everything, because sometimes the kids get louder and they become more aggressive because we're trying to ignore the small ones. I am not a mom, but I have nieces and nephews, and we all know what it's like to take a child to the grocery store and they really want candy. Sometimes you try to ignore it and it works. Other times you ignore it and they get louder, and then all of a sudden you can't go grocery shopping anymore with them because you haven't taught the appropriate behaviors. Offering choices, this is super easy, okay, before the behavior occurs, right? Because when the behaviors are occurring, their cognition is pretty limited. But offering the choice before, okay, do you want to blow bubbles or do you want to color? And then they can choose. And then this also gives them control. Okay. So I was at the same conference that I was at a few weeks ago by Lanny Lawson. She did this activity and it really resonated with me. Okay, your boss that you love dearly has told you that you have to go to a picnic on Saturday for 12 hours. but you get to choose one of these reinforcements. So just take a minute and decide. Oh, and you have to play with kids all day, and there's no breaks.
How long is the all-inclusive trip?
5 days. All right, you guys all know what you kind of want? Okay. All right, these are all reinforcements to you. If you chose, oh, you can't see the colors, I'm sorry. Okay, if you chose $700 or free wine, you want something tangible. You are somebody who likes to get reinforced by something tangible. If you are someone with a live-in nanny or a personal chef, it's attention. Your function of your behavior to go to this is attention. If you are a massage every week for 3 months or being given time to work out every day for 2 hours, what do you think it is? Sensory, attention, sensory. Then, if you're the green ones on the bottom, all-inclusive trip to Mexico with airfare included, or a 3-day trip to Italy, what do you think you're seeking? Escape, exactly. All right. Now, what we tend to do is, just a quick question, who is tangible? Anybody tangible? I'm a tangible person. I'm all about the free wine every week for 3 months. How about attention? Who wants a live-in nanny or a personal chef? Who's sensory? A massage, working out, and who wants to escape? Now, okay, escape people. I'm just gonna put you on the spot. What if I give you a live-in nanny? How do you think, what are you gonna do?
Well, I don't have any children, so a live-in nanny.
Exactly. Exactly, but this is what we tend to do with our students, is we give them the wrong reinforcer for their function of their behavior. If you don't have kids, what am I gonna do with a live-in nanny? Nothing. I don't want the attention. Same thing goes for, you just had a baby, a newborn baby, 2 days old, and someone told you you're going to Italy. You'd be like, no, I'm not going to Italy, I have a newborn baby. I mean, you might want to go to Italy, but most people are going to be like, no, I need to care for this child, I cannot leave. So just being super aware and just knowing what your kids are reinforced by is super important. Oh, did anyone choose the goodness of their heart doing this for free? Right. But we expect our children to come to school and pay attention and work every day out of the goodness of their heart. So just keep that all in mind. We ask our students to be intrinsically motivated, but sometimes we aren't always intrinsically motivated. Okay. I'll do one more example, and then it will be a little early for lunch, but just a few minutes. All right. You tell a joke at a party, and everybody laughs. Chances are you're going to say that joke again, right? You've been positively reinforced. You tell that joke at a party, and nobody laughs. Do you think you're going to go and say that joke again? Probably not. You were negatively reinforced. So just knowing the reinforcers, knowing what your kid likes and doesn't like, your child will work for something. It may not seem like they will work for anything, but they will work for something. And you just gotta figure out what they'll work for. We had a student who would work for marbles, of all things, clear marbles. using sensory preferences for reinforcers, I have a video that I'll show after lunch about how you could do a sensory preference assessment to see exactly what they like. The only constant is change. Be prepared to make change on the reinforcers. The child might like something one day and then the next day it might not be reinforcing to them. So just being aware, kind of going back to that example, there's different times in our lives where we will be reinforced by different things. We'll be reinforced by a trip to Mexico, but then there's another time in our lives that is not reinforcing. We rather have a live-in nanny. So just being aware that reinforcers can change. Take them out of the rotation as a reinforcer, not an addiction. Okay, we'll jump into this after lunch. Yes?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes. Here.
So the question I have, I didn't know if you can address this a little bit more. I was confused when you gave the example about the student who was seeking the speech pathologist's attention in a small group and was hitting the speech pathologist. And you said that if you took the student and gave them attention before the session, that would satisfy their, but so I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, because we've done things with students before, like the check-in, check-out, where, you know, you are craving the teacher's attention and let's go have you check in with her or the social worker or whomever at the beginning of the day. But now it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and that student is still having that behavior. I just don't understand how seeing them in the morning satisfies, or seeing them prior to satisfies that need for attention in the moment. Because that student isn't still going to be in that class with 5 other kids competing for the attention. So I guess I just don't understand the connection, because it's not working for a student. Like, giving that attention at another time is just not working. In that moment, that student still wants the attention, and we just don't have a good way to satisfy his need for attention
Right.
at that time. So can you talk about that, or maybe that's in the afternoon session? I'm not sure.
And I'll dive into that now.
Sorry to keep everybody from lunch.
Okay, so it's different for every student, right? So some students might be satisfied with that little 5 minutes before. They might be satisfied with talking to a teacher before the school day starts and then at the end of the school days. But if that child is still attention seeking and it's not working, then it can always be like giving them a sticker while they're sitting next to you, or you just make a conscious effort, like with a timer, like every minute I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say, okay, now it's your turn, if it's constant. So it just depends on every child so that's what an FBA and figuring out that function would be, like how often do they want to be reinforced, how often are they exhibiting the behavior. Yes, you have more to.
So I think this also connects to what you were saying earlier about the teach, model, prompt, reinforce, because the check-in, check-out is not really supposed to be meeting the need for the student's attention. It's really a separate thing. So you would use that check-in, check-out as part of the teach, model, prompt, reinforce. So you're teaching the student, how do I request attention appropriately? And so that's what you're teaching and modeling. And then as part of the check-in, check-out, one of the questions where they're earning points could be, did I seek attention appropriately? So that could be how they're earning their points. Does that make sense with the check-in, check-out? It's not meant to give them the attention, but to teach them how to request attention appropriately.
But during the check-in, check-out, they're not teaching them anything.
No, you're not.
Just for the attention.
Repeat that, Sharon.
Do you repeat?
During the check-in, check-out, you're not teaching anything.
So during the check-in, check-out, you're not teaching anyone, is what you said. Correct. The check-in, check-out is the reinforcement piece. Right. You're saying it's the attention piece so the check-in, check-out would maybe be every half hour they're getting reinforcement from their teacher. Did I earn the points? So that gives them the attention.
Not just throughout the day.
Correct.
They need to constantly be checking in and checking out.
Right.
Because our things are not set up that way. It's morning and afternoon only.
So with that student, they need to
I mean, every situation.
Right, if there's that high of a need of attention, you would want to have the checking in and checking out throughout the day. Not necessarily going back to the social worker, but even just from the teacher, every half hour, at the end of every period, here's your points, and then discuss it with someone later. But they're getting those points regularly.
Interrupting the lesson.
Not interrupting the lesson, but at the end of every lesson.
So, you guys probably already know a lot of all of this stuff that I've been presenting today, but like Sherry just said, it takes a typically developing child 3 times to hear something. So it also takes adults that much time to hear something, think about it, and actually implement it.
I'd like to say that, let me come close to you. That when I hear that though, it reminds me that they will learn. They'll learn through their 30s, they'll learn through their 40s, they'll continue to learn. We have a limited time with them while they're in school, but that's also a hopeful sign to me.
Absolutely. And a lot of these skills are lifelong skills too. If we take a lifelong perspective of teaching these students, a child grabbing someone's hand when they're 3 to pull them to something, we think it's kind of cute and we're like, oh, look, they want to show me something. But do we feel the same way when a 19-year-old is pulling our hand? Not necessarily. So we need to think about how we can address some of these behaviors now and thinking of their lifelong perspective. So when they are 30 or 40, they don't go up in the grocery store and pull someone through the grocery store to get something that they want. Also, I really dove into the sensory piece this morning just because of my own prior experience. We're all filled with tons of knowledge and we know tons of strategies and interventions and things that we can do. And with one particular student, we were putting in a bunch of interventions in place and some things were working, some things were not. Then we started to look really at the sensory piece and we started to implement 4 sensory breaks, and almost all of his behaviors have diminished or reduced greatly. So just think about, you can implement a ton of interventions, but if their sensory needs are not being met, then like I said earlier, you could probably throw those out the window because their sensory needs need to be met first. Just like our own sensory needs need to be met in order for us to learn. You know, some of us have coats on in here, but if you didn't know that when I am cold, I can put on my coat, and you were someone that just fixated on it, now I'm really cold, now I'm really cold, and then you might do something like scream and get attention, or you might run out of the room to someplace where it's warmer. So just keep that all in the back of your mind. All right, so we talked about what reinforces us. And if I chose a nanny for you, some of you thought that was awesome. Some of you did not. So think about what your child is reinforced by. Even though they go for a dinosaur one day, that doesn't mean that's their reinforcer. We need to actually document the things that they're going for. Ask the student, if they have enough language, ask them, what would you like to play with during your sensory time? Or what would you want as a prize? Because what they say might not be what you think it is. Like I said, the marbles, I would never guess marbles, but that was reinforcing. If the student can, have them list their reinforcements in the order that their preferences. Observe the students, see what they continue to gravitate for. They might always gravitate for a phone, a play phone. They might always gravitate towards a doll. That might be reinforcing to them. And then you can also do reinforcer sampling and preference assessments. So this next video is a woman out of Vanderbilt University, and she's doing a preference assessment with the students. And basically she has 5 items on the table. The student looks at them all, grabs one. Then after a few seconds, the woman takes that, puts it in a basket. Now there's 4 items. The student takes that and she's documenting but she's also she's documenting what the child took first, second, third, all the way to the last one. What she's also documenting is the location that the child is pulling from. They might always pull from the middle. And it's not necessarily that they're reinforced by that particular object. It's just, you know, what their line of vision is or something they're always going for them. And then you do that multiple times to see if it's the same number one. And then you go from there. So I think I figured out how to make this work. Okay.
Ready, Bud? Ready, Bud? Pick one. The phone. Good choice. Beep, 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 beep. Ring, 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 ring. Hello? Hi, Tyler.
No. I know.
My turn in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put in. Try again. Put in. Good job. Pick one. We have dinosaur, maracas, ball, and bells.
No.
Which one?
No.
You picked dinosaur. Cool. You giving him a bite? We can make him run. We can make him run or jump. Choose one. We have maracas, ball, and bells. Choose one. You picked the ball. Good choice.
Mama.
Oh, it's all gone. It's all lit up. You ready, bud? Choose one. We have bells and maracas. Which one do you want? You want bells or maracas? You picked bells. Good choice. Uh-oh. Shake, shake, shake our bells. Shake, shake, shake our bells. Uh-oh. Choose one. You picked maracas.
So these last three items, do you think they're super reinforcing to the child? No. So something you could do is you could then put out back the phone and the dinosaur and then a couple other items and continue to go through and trial. Okay, they always take the phone first. They always take the dinosaur second and then go on from there. So okay. So primary reinforcers are sleep, food, our basic needs, water. If none of us sleep, are we going to have a hard time paying attention? Are we going to have a hard time doing our basic functional daily task? Yeah. Edibles, food, sensory items, you know, a swing, scoop chair, the cush ball, maybe it's a like a weighted vest, tangible, something that they can hold on to, a stuffed animal, a privilege or an activity. All right, you know, if we get to do this, then we get to go to the playground for a little bit. If we do this, then we get extra recess. They can work towards something, or iPad time. And then social. Some kids just want to talk, and that's all they need to be reinforced. Yes.
You guys know another method for determining reinforcers? It's not on the list. Ask the parents. They always have a lot of ideas that the school usually haven't thought of, and we have to wait till the IEP meeting to find that out, right? So just information from the parents at home, what does he get reinforced by? Now, every family I have visited for the last 15 years has said the cell phone or the computer, right, video games. And so in some children, it's difficult to get them to stop doing that after 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. And even with a visual timer, sometimes that's difficult. So maybe with some children that doesn't work best. But I just want to throw in, always ask the parents. They'll come up with things you're like, what? Bubbles? I didn't know they like bubbles, and ideas that you haven't thought of before.
Awesome. And something, I guess, that we kind of learned the hard way this year was we were doing an iPad as a reinforcer, and they would start a TV show, and then we would set a timer for 5 minutes. And then the school counselor actually made a comment the one time, which was like, I would be really irritated if you told me I had to stop a show after 5 minutes. And I was like, who wouldn't be? If you're really into something and someone's like, oh, all right, time to work again, you'd be like, no, I want to watch my show. So I thought that was really cool. So reinforcement is key. We are all constantly reinforced by things. Like I said, nobody chose the goodness of their heart for a reason. We are all reinforced by, you know, our paycheck, or we love going to work, but most of us probably wouldn't do that for free. So we're all reinforced by something. So behavior results in high rates of reinforcement. They escape the room. They just got reinforced because now they're out of the crazy, loud, disruptive room. So the big thing about this is if you can provide that reinforcement throughout the day, even when they do something good. So if their function of their behavior is always escaping, provide that break time where they can leave the room when they did something good. Then they will learn, or if you have like a sensory room, provide that sensory room when they did something good, because then they'll learn, I don't have to do this behavior to get reinforced. I could do this and still get reinforced. So if I ask for a break, I could get reinforced by taking a walk. I can get reinforced by going and getting a drink of water. So there's different things you could do with that. But make sure that you're always providing that reinforcement for something positive, not only the times that they're exhibiting a behavior. And then we talked about the FBA, check the function, take data. The function you think it is might not always be that function. It might be multiple functions. So the more data you take, and then as you start to provide reinforcement, so like the attention, the SLP starts, you know, giving attention every minute to that student, or the check in, check out every half hour, that might not be the function of that behavior, right? But you can tell with data, okay, I've done this intervention, I've done this, and it's not working. Then you could look at other functions. So like I said, expose them to the function of the behavior, catch them being good, reinforce them for being good. You do something good, you get something good. And we just need to reinforce as often as possible. I think most of us enjoy when our bosses tell us we did something good, not only the times that we did something bad. So common mistakes that we tend to make. We just assume that when a kid refuses that they just don't want to do something. Well, it could be a lot more. It could be the sensory piece. It could be attention. It could be they want something tangible. It could be that they had a horrible night last night sleeping. So there's a wide array of things that can be going on. We tend to focus too much on work compliance, and we're like, the child needs to finish this worksheet. And they're screaming, and we're like, okay, well, when you come back and you calm down, you're still going to finish this worksheet. That's not always the case, and it doesn't always have to be necessary. There's definitely a time and a place for that. But if they can do 3 problems now, great. Then we could do 3 problems later. So just think about how you can break things up to be easier for your students. Tell them instead of teaching them. So it's much easier for me to have a conversation with you sitting next to you, and we can go back and forth and talk about how to, better help your students. Me teaching to you, you're absorbing a little bit of this, you're taking what you want. Same thing with our kids, right? They tune in for a little while, you just said something about dogs, I love dogs, and then they tune out. But if you're one-on-one with them and you're just talking to them, they're more apt to listen. So just be aware of how much you're giving direct instruction, and think about other ways that you can make it more informal. We tend to be inflexible as educators, and that is not on the fault of us. That is on the school system as a whole. Our principal says we need to do this. Our boss says we need to do this. We have to give this assessment. We have to do this. So sometimes we make the classrooms inflexible for the students, but because of the stress that's put on us. So just thinking of ways that you can make things easier for our students, less stressful. And then kind of that intrinsic motivation. None of us are going to go volunteer. Well, I shouldn't say none of us. Most of us aren't going to go volunteer our time on a Saturday for 12 hours if we don't have to. We're not that intrinsically motivated. But we assume our kids should be intrinsically motivated to learn. Not necessarily. So just think about things that you can make, how you can make the lessons more engaging, how you can meet their sensory needs, how you could provide reinforcement, positive praise, all that stuff. All right. So those evidence-based practices that I talked about this morning, now we're going to start diving into those. Also, I apologize that the PowerPoint's all out of order. So, all right. The first one is called structured teaching. So, I know you guys know nothing about structured teaching right now, okay? But think in your head how structured your classroom is right now before having prior knowledge of what structured teaching is, 1 through 5. And then think about your instruction. How structured is your instruction? All right, so for the first one, I'm going to have you put up 1 through 5 of how structured you think your classroom is before knowing structured teaching. 1 through 5. With 5 being the most structured and 1 being the least structured. Okay. Now rate your instruction. How structured do you think your instruction is? 5 being the most structured and 1 being the least structured. All right.
I'm not seeing a lot of hands.
All right, so why structured teaching? Structured teaching is out of North Carolina, and they look at how to change your work, the classroom environment, visual schedules, work systems, and then work systems, visuals. There's one other that I'm forgetting. So this has been proven for kids with autism. So now what Dr. Borders and Dr. Jones-Bach are looking at is applying this to children who are DWD, deaf with disabilities, and to see if a lot of these things will carry over and be successful with these children. So the goals of structured teaching is to increase individual skills, independence, flexibility, self-advocacy, and generalization. And structured teaching builds on their prior knowledge. So structured versus traditional strategies. So a traditional strategy, so think about a teacher who just talked to you all day, and then they would show you a math problem, and then they might say, okay, go for it. And if you got it right, you got an A. Great, nice work. Structured teaching really changes that and kind of makes things more predictable. There's routines, there's a visual schedule, it increases engagement, it reduces anxiety for the students, and it increases appropriate behaviors. Has anyone heard of structured teach? Okay, awesome. Are you guys using it? A little bit?
Question.
Yes.
You know how it reduces anxiety?
Because there's more structure in the day with like the environment, the visual schedule, the work systems. They know what is coming. So there's more routines. They're able to predict what they're going to do. There's no surprises. So this is the pyramid, and this is, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. So first is physical structure, then is schedules, work systems, and then routines, and then visual structure of materials. In the study that we're doing with Dr. Borders, we've changed a few of these steps. We've gone physical structure, schedules, and then we've done a little bit of the visual strategies and then work systems. But they all kind of build on each other. All right, physical structure. Which room would you prefer to stay in tonight? The one on the right or the one on the left? Probably most of us would say the one on the left. So physical structure is so important. So when we set up our classrooms, we want to make sure, I know a lot of this is tricky if you're itinerant, there's only so much you can do. But if we have a classroom, what we want to do is we want to make certain boundaries and we want to make areas predictable. If the child is going to go to the calendar area, we want them to understand, okay, if I'm in this area, we're going to work on calendar. If I sit at the table, we're going to work on writing. So there's boundaries, there's like a bookshelf, there's physical boundaries that show the student where they're going to be and what they're going to do. So this kind of helps with the predictability. If a child goes, right now, if a child walks into an empty classroom, do they have any idea what they're going to work on? No. But if there's that corner is calendar, this area is writing, this area is play, and I walk in and play is closed off, and the teacher's, my visual schedule says, okay, we're doing writing, and there's a picture of the table, I can go over there and match the picture, and then I know what I'm going to do. Typically, I'm going to work on writing. Or if it's on my visual schedule, it says we're going to the play area, I can then match the picture, and then I know that I'm going to play. I'm not going to be working on writing. This helps with the transitions. Transitions are super hard for our kids, so this helps clarify those transitions. So why physical structures? It provides organization. It helps everybody understand the activities that are occurring in the desired areas at any given time. It helps the student anticipate the requirements of the specific setting. It minimizes competing distractions. If there are bookcases and they're sitting at the table, they might not be able to see all the toys that they actually really want to play with. But if they're in this area, then they know they have to write. You can also put like a piece of cloth on bookcases and stuff, which is super cheap. You could go to the store and just put cloth on bookcases. So then if a child is sitting at the table and they see all the toys, they're going to want to play with those toys. But if there's a sheet over it, then it helps them better focus. And with physical structure, there was more on time, on task behaviors, and higher academic achievements. Do any of you guys have like defined areas in your classroom? Yeah? What kind of defined areas do you have?
So I have some rolling dividers in my room, and so like
Yeah,
I
I'll give
have
you. Sorry.
I have some, oh, that's loud, sorry. Some rolling dividers in my room, so like my table is in this one area and then there's a divider and it's like against like a counters over here.
Awesome.
So it's
Yeah.
like sandwiched in between, and then there's another table on the other side of the room, and I have two different rugs, one that we do typically
Perfect.
story time on and one that we do like more movement and
Awesome.
other activities on.
So that's awesome because it makes the routines more predictable and the students know if I'm on this rug, typically we're going to move. If I'm over here, typically we're going to sit and do calendar and whatnot. Any questions on physical structure? Sometimes this is hard due to space. If you're an itinerant, this is really difficult. So typically if you're an itinerant, that child is still in a classroom somewhere, right? So you could still talk to that teacher about physical structures that they can implement in their classroom. Yes?
I was just going to say, I'm an itinerant teacher, so obviously we have to take our office with us and all of our supplies, and we can't have our space already set up. But a lot of times I try to go to the space first and just set up the table. And if it is a student that I know they need to work through so many minutes on this, so many minutes on that, I'll just line it up on the table that way, like the hearing aid
Perfect.
checking, cleaning stuff first. And then, you know, even if we don't do a physical check off, they just know
kinda
we
like-
move from one thing to the next.
Awesome. That's kind of like a work. It's kind of like a work system, which is the third step in this. All right. Schedules. We live on schedules, on our phones and our planners. That's a lot of how we function. I know a lot of us would be lost without our planners or lost without our phones or our calendars, or we wouldn't bring Sally to soccer practice because we forgot that it was on Tuesdays at 5. The kids strive on routines and schedules too, but we don't make it very explicit for them. So visual schedules can be a wide variety of things. They can look very different depending on the skill of the child. Also, schedules can be universally designed for all the learners in that room. So a schedule could be for one child to tell them exactly what they're going to do, but also you can have a visual schedule in your classroom that tells all of the kids what they're going to do. And it's not going to harm anyone to have a visual schedule that tells everybody what they're going to do. So schedules communicate the sequence of events that are going to occur. It tells them where and when, and is also designed to match the individual needs. So if they're carrying their schedule with them, that is their schedule. And they know that I go to Miss Anna's room, and then I go to the gym, and then I go here, and etc. The assessment of the required skills is an assessment that you can give to decide how high the child is, what kind of visual schedule they could benefit from. A visual schedule can also be a half a day, it could be a period, or it could be a whole day. It all depends on your students. And also you might have to trial and error with schedules. Some schedules work, some don't. Sometimes, there's a change during the day, and if you have a set schedule for them, and then all of a sudden there's a change, that inflexibility, that child might have a really hard time getting past that. Okay, I have a musical performance today, but it says I'm supposed to be doing science. So just think about everything that happens during the day and how you can adjust for the child. So why visual schedules? It enhances the receptive language. It assists with their independence. If they know what they're going to do, then they're more likely to, if they see what they're going to do next, they're more likely to do that. It's just like us. If we didn't have schedules and we forgot to bring Sally to soccer, and there was nothing telling us that Sally has soccer practice, and something came up, we might not remember. And it reduces anxiety and increases flexibility. So if you create a schedule that has Velcro and you can change things throughout the day, and you could say, whoops, there was a change, and it maybe is a triangle, and you teach the child that the triangle means change, and then you explain what that change is. When you get to that point, you're kind of foreshadowing what is going to happen, and then they might tend to be more flexible because they've been forewarned, they see it on their schedule, they know when the change is coming. So what to consider when you're implementing this? How you represent it. Is it on a wall? Is that child always in that same room that you could put it on a wall? Is it in a folder that they carry with them? How long is it? Is it only a period? Is it a half a day? Is it just the morning? Is it just the afternoon? Or is it all day? How do you manipulate it? And also for our vision, this all could be tactile. So they can learn that if I feel this, I know I'm supposed to be in this place at this time. How do they manipulate it? Do they pull things off when they're done? Do they put it in a finish bin? Do they leave it on there and they check it off? You know, you gotta think of where your students are and how you can manipulate it. Again, location, where's that schedule gonna be? And then teaching them to use it. So there's kind of the teach, model, prompt, reinforce. You have to teach them how to use their schedule. If you just were handed, you know, a brand new phone, someone has to teach you how to use it, how to pull up the calendar, how to put in a date. We also have to teach our kids, okay, this is what this means. This is how I model it. When I see this, that means I go to here. And then we prompt and reinforce. How many of you are using visual schedules now? Pretty successfully? Kinda? Yes?
I wanted to add something. I feel like a lot of the visual schedule is for elementary, and I teach middle school. I don't know if there's any other middle school or high school out there, but I have on my board, our school has a Cricut, so I've made Cricut labels for each class in order, and then I write the homework next to the class so that the students know the predictable order of our periods. We have a 10-period schedule, and then for each class period, I have the name of the class on a laminated cardstock with magnetic tape on the back, and so for each class, I write out what we're doing. So that's just like an adaptation of how to do a visual schedule, but for older kids.
Awesome.
And then I can always just change things and erase and have the kids write up the homework sometimes too, to have them be more involved. So.
Awesome. Anybody else have? Oh.
I know one thing that helped one of my students get involved was he was the one for his own schedule. We took pictures of him doing each task. So then him seeing himself on his schedule, he can remember, oh yeah, that's next, or that's next.
Right.
And I don't really need to help him anymore because he just looks at his chart.
Awesome. So that's also something to take in consideration. Can the students understand by looking at board maker pictures, or do they need a picture of themselves? Anybody else want to share their visual schedules? Yeah.
Our school has Monday through Friday, but they also have ABCDE days. So having the visual schedule very manipulative. So I have ones that are ABCD, what happens. There's our general schedule, there's ABCD, and then there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So we can kind of have our specials on a separate spot compared to our general regular classes. And that has helped the kids a lot because I can't even remember what they're having every day.
Right.
Because of that change about every 2 weeks. We have either a day off or we have an early release, which isn't an ABCDE. So that's helped all of us a lot.
And that's something to take into consideration is at the beginning of the school year, I know a lot of us, if our schedule has changed, we're dependent on, okay, at this time I have, these 4 students, and we're dependent on the schedule. So think about our kids, and then think about how much we add into their day, and we go on field trips, and we bring in music, and they have gym. So just having that structure of knowing, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, helps reduce that anxiety. And it also helps them be more flexible, because if they know it's a ABCD day, then they know, okay, I followed this schedule. Whereas if they didn't have that, they would probably be exhibiting a lot of behaviors because they were thrown off, they were anxious. So thank you for sharing. All right, work systems. So this is kind of what someone back there was mentioning when they lay out their different tasks for the period. So a work system is a systematic and organized presentation of tasks and materials that communicate at least 4 pieces of information. So this is, the child can go and grab a task box, and they know I do this, and then I do this, and I do this, and it tells them visually what they're supposed to do. They know how many tasks they're supposed to do. They know when the work is finished, and then they know what to do after the task is complete. So a work system is going to look very different for every child. Some kids can be given a task box, and they can complete the 4 worksheets, and they see there's a video coming up, and it shows different shapes. So like there's a triangle, a square, a rectangle, and then something else. And those correlate to the 4 worksheets that child is supposed to complete. So the child knows, okay, I do the triangle first, then I do the rectangle, then I do the square, and they do their 4 worksheets, and they know when they're done, they get reinforced and they're finished. So many of our kids, is never ending. They don't know when they're going to be finished with something. Just kind of like you guys sitting here today. You don't know when this is going to be over. So it's kind of hard to get your mind to think about, okay, so many of our kids, they think about what they're going to do after school. They really want those video games. You guys might have a to-do list that is like, when I'm done with this presentation, I need to go grocery shopping. This is our kids too. If we could give them the structure to understand, I do these things and then I'm done, it helps ease the anxiety. Does anyone do work systems? This is you do? What age are your kids?
We do vocational work box classes.
Okay.
Some of them are.
I'm sorry. I'm not being a very good presenter.
So we have different vocational task boxes. Some of my kids are doing put-ins. One of my students who has a visual impairment, I have him doing top, middle, bottom with different shapes. And he's actually doing a pretty good job with it. So the triangle goes at the top, and the circle goes in the middle, and the square goes at the bottom. So he's doing orientation as well as the shapes, matching colors, various things.
There you go. So the work systems just make things more predictable for the students. Do you want to share? Or is it similar to?
Yeah, it's similar.
Okay. So work systems are pretty simple of how you can implement them. They could they could look like a little box as itinerates. This is what you do. You carry your stuff with you. You could create a box. Kind of like you were saying how you lay things out in order. Then that child knows, okay, we're going to work on my device. Then we're going to work on this and this and this. Same thing could be for visual impairments. You can have them touch all the things that they're going to do so then they understand. These are my 4 tasks. I touched 4 things. I understand there's 4 things that have to be done, and then I'm finished. So why work systems? They address our challenges, like I said. It helps you know when things are going to be done. It helps scene organization. It limits the distractibility if they know they can do these 3 things with the structured classroom and the visual schedule. It reduces that. They learn how to sequence things. They learn how to follow an order. And then they're able to more likely generalize these skills into other areas. And then there's independent initiation. So here's a video of a little boy. So the first part of this video is actually his sister modeling the whole task. And the little boy watches his sister do the task, and then he does it. And it'll show you like day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Day 1 is very difficult, but then by day 4, he's doing the whole thing by himself.
We are all done. Now it's your turn, Danny. Now remember, when you're done with your work, you get to do something fun. Look, Danny, you sit down. Okay, see, Danny, you're gonna do the try and get. Do this one. Danny, look. Front. Look, Danny. Front. What's that say? Back. Danny, look. Inside. Okay, now, Danny, you take the paper and put it in here. It says finished. Danny, sit down. You're doing it. No, not done. Paper. Put it in the finish box. Six starts. Now put it in the finish. Good job, you did it, Danny! Gonna do some work. Triangle, square, rectangle. Triangle, square, rectangle. Okay. Danny, don't do that with your chair. Be careful. Be careful. Triangle, square, rectangle, square. Triangle, rectangle. Six. Triangle, square, rectangle. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 5 plus 2 equals 7. Thank you. Did you do it? High five! Yeah, Daddy, good job. Good job, honey.
So super simple to implement. So then the visual structures is that triangle, square, so then they know, okay, this is what I have to do during this task. So that visual structure just adds more information that makes the routines more predictable, and it helps the child know exactly what needs to be done. What I wanted to say about that video. When the mom started that video, was it most to least prompts or least to most? So most to least is hand over hand, and then least to most is just a verbal prompt. Most to least. She had to help him and kind of keep him in that chair. And then by the last day, she just told him, do your work. And that was just a verbal prompt, and he was able to do it. Now, not everything's going to work that quickly, but for this child it did. And you never know what is going to work for your child, but some things might work. It also adds visual clarity, which helps the child better understand without a lot of language. So it increases meaning and understanding of what is to be done. It allows the student to refer to the instructions. So when we give a verbal instruction, and it's 5 different steps, if I was going to tell you how to make an IKEA bed, and I told you the 5 steps, do you think you would remember all 5 steps verbally? Probably not. So this just really helps them understand how to do something. And then you can also incorporate the student's unique interest. On that worksheet, it was shapes, but if they really love superheroes, you could put different superheroes. If they like different animals, you could put different animals. It increases the engagement and meaning. So how do you implement this? This depends on every child, and it depends on where their skills are. As you saw in that video, it was with the most to least prompts. Sometimes the child might just need you to sit next to them and model it. Sometimes it could be a peer model doing the task, and then the child sits next to that peer and watches them do it. And then just include the student's interest. And in all of these strategies, just make sure you're including student interest. So some tips for implementing structured teaching. Think about how your materials can be used across the whole day. Don't try to make it only for one period. But if you use that task box, how can you use it for the next period? Or maybe you have 5 for the day, and 1 is writing, 1 is reading, 1 is math. How can you use those every day? How can you use them throughout? Share these resources. Like I said, if you're itinerant and you walk into one of those classrooms and there's clutter everywhere, how can you tell them, hey, this might be visually distracting, this might be really hard for the child? Sharing your knowledge. Now, going back, 1 to 5, how many of you, 1 being the least structured and 5 being the most structured, how many of you have kind of changed a little bit of how structured your classroom is? A little bit. How about your teaching? After learning what actual structured teaching is, a little bit. All right, here's a video of a little British girl who talks about her whole structured teach and her day.
My name is Alice, and I want to tell you about how I learn. I go to mainstream school. This is where I learn. It has structure with clear areas where my learning takes place. I like boundaries. There are different parts of the floor where different learning takes place. I also like to learn outdoors. I share my learning space with lots of other children. Sometimes it can get a bit much. My teachers help me when I feel like this. We worked out some ways together, which means I'm able to learn. First, they find a place for me to work, a workstation. My teachers show me my visual timetable. We work together so I can focus on what we're doing. And I can get my reward later. This helps me become independent so I can do my timetable on my own. If I get lost, my teacher uses a check your timetable card. When I know what my teachers want me to do, I go to my workstation, where I can work in my own structured way. With my tasks to do on the left, my workspace in the middle, and my finished work on the right. My teachers help me with my work schedule too. So I know what's going to happen now, next, and then. My teacher introduces the schedule, sometimes reminds me to use it, to make sure the tasks are done. My teacher has to remind me less and less. I like it when the tasks are laid left to right, and I know that there is a finish. I start with what my teacher calls a posting exercise. After this, we'll make it harder by doing a 2-part posting exercise. We also work on matching activities, fine motor skills, and lots more. Once the work is finished, we put it in the finished box. I learnt the idea of finished by using my finished box. When I am done, I get my reward. Remember, structured environment, a visual timetable, schedule, and the idea of finished. When all this is done, I get my reward. And next time, I'll do my work to get my reward again. Bye! Thank you!
So some of these are pretty easy to implement, and they just take a couple of changes. A lot of this stuff you're already doing in your classroom. It's just adding a visual to it or adding a firm boundary with a bookcase. Thank you. Okay. So the next one is antecedent-based interventions. And basically this is doing anything that we can to stop that behavior. So this is pretty common sense, and most of you probably already do this, but it's just, if you do an FBA, it's looking at that behavior, what is causing that behavior, and doing something to stop that behavior. So this intervention might be, so this is, sorry, I'm gonna lose my voice. This is to modify the environment. It's after the FBA is completed, so you know what the function of the behavior is, and then what can you do to stop that behavior. So kind of like when we talked about the sensory piece, we talked about what are those triggers and then how we can change those triggers so then the behavior doesn't occur. So the steps that are involved are, yes?
To
was just going to say, I was thinking a little bit more about the students where it's hard to determine what the antecedent is. And I was thinking about some cases where sometimes instead of looking at what is causing the behavior, maybe if it's easier because it's happening so frequently, looking at the times when the behavior isn't happening, and then looking at what might be similar between those scenarios, like at this certain time in the day the behavior didn't exhibit, or the student didn't exhibit that behavior at this time of the day. What did those two things have in common? And maybe you can kind of weed it out that way.
That was awesome. Yeah, that's an awesome point. Because there are going to be times when the behavior is non-exhibit, and why is that? Why aren't they exhibiting it? What needs are being met that they don't have to exhibit the behavior? So as we talked before, just knowing what a student's reinforcers are. So this is after you do an FBA. 2, identify what that interfering behavior is and where it happens, what is going on, or kind of like you said, where is the behavior not happening? What's going on? What are they being reinforced by? Where is it happening? 3, pair the intervention with the ABI strategy. So this might be choice making. So instead of if the behavior always comes down to you just told the children to free play and they don't know all of those choices of free play stresses them out, that they don't know how to choose. You can provide choices. Do you want to play with the dolls or do you want to play in the kitchen? And then collecting data. So antecedent-based interventions are pretty easy to implement. And a lot of us think we're doing it already, but we don't do it consistently. And we don't do it with things that the child might necessarily find reinforcing. So if we provide 2 choices and the child doesn't want either of those choices, chances are the behavior is still going to occur. So you have to figure out what choices are reinforcing. It might be 2 tasks that they don't want to do, but then it's using that first then. First we have to do a task, then we can take a break. So implementing pre-activity interventions, kind of like I just said, you're kind of talking them through or showing them through what is expected. You're altering how instruction is delivered. If the more you talk stresses them out, showing them pictures, showing them that visual schedule or that visual structure of these are the tasks that have to be done, and then giving them the choice of maybe these are the 2 tasks that you can decide between. And then just enriching the environment. Giving them options, giving them things that they're interested in, incorporating their interest. So you can alter your environment by adding visuals. You could change the visual structure by defining the areas, very similar to structured teaching. You could change their seating. You can add space between the students. If a student is always, if the proximity of another student is a trigger, you could just move them over. These are simple strategies that you just have to know what the antecedent is, and then you implement those. And then visual timers, sometimes a kid just needs to know there's 10 minutes or there's 5 minutes left, 3 minutes left. Probably most of you do antecedent-based interventions in your classroom. So you could just talk with your partner about, one, if you don't do antecedent-based interventions or structured teaching in your classroom, you could just kind of talk about how maybe is this a potential to add to your classroom. For the itineraries, are there pieces of things that you can add to your instruction? So you can have like 5 or 10 minutes just to talk about that with the neighbor. Do you guys all have a few things that you think you could change in your classroom? All right. All right, another thing that we can change is visual supports. So we talked a lot about these visual supports earlier, but just having labels on boxes, labels in areas, having boundaries where you understand where certain things are. This all makes the day more predictable. It all makes everything easier for the child. All right, functional communication training. This, yes.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
The classroom that we observed in the video, is that a general classroom? Oh, okay. I thought it was like a self-contained, but it's a
It was a mainstream classroom. So her question was that in that video that we watched, was that a general ed classroom or a self-contained classroom? It was a mainstream classroom, but they have implemented certain things for this child to be successful within that classroom. They gave her own workspace, they gave her own visual schedule, they gave her visual structures. Basically doing the same things that all the other kids are doing, but just giving her that structure to reduce that anxiety. So functional communication training is just basically replacing that unwanted behavior with a form of communication. So every time, for example, every time Molly wants something, she goes over to her little 4-year-old friend and bites them. She wants them to share, but she doesn't have that communication to say, please share with me. She bites them, they let go of the item, awesome, now I just got it. So functional communication training is just teaching the child a way to communicate that is functional. So some are PEC systems. Some, instead of a child getting up and screaming and running, it's just pointing to, I need a break card. That is just teaching them, I need a break, we need to step out of the room, or whatever it looks like to that child. I need to do a puzzle, I need to calm down. Instead of screaming or hitting. The I need a break could look in a variety of different ways. It could be all text. It could be I need a drink of water. If the kid doesn't want to say I need a break, whatever works for that child. It could be a picture of the child during break time. So then they point to it, and that's their way to communicate.
I have a variation of that I want to mention, where instead of I need a break, I need time to accept. And then that
Like
lets the
processing.
child know that the responsibility is back on them to change. And you give them time to accept. And if you give them enough time, they will accept and then say finished and then move on. But I just like that idea that they're processing, that they're not just getting a break, they're not going to get a reward, but they have time to accept the new direction or the change in schedule.
I like that. That's also, a lot of these kids need wait time. And something that I learned was when you ask a question, you wait until it's awkward, and then you wait again. And that's sometimes how long it takes for our kids to process something. But we're so anxious to then prompt them and help them. But sometimes they just need 10 seconds to wait and understand the task and then move on. But if we quickly give them another task, they might get frazzled, they might get anxious, and then stressed out. So for functional communication training, again, you start with an FBA to see what that function is, what the behavior is. Then once you have that behavior, what can you do to basically the antecedent, what can you implement to change that behavior? Or what can you do to allow them to communicate their needs? All right. So at the bottom it says share please. And that's basically the example of the little girl Molly who was biting everybody. She would go around and just show that picture. And then the rest of her peers knew when someone shows you this picture, that means they want you to share. And most of the other students were pretty receptive in understanding that when I'm shown this picture, I should share with Molly, because most of them didn't want to be bit. All right, so we have like 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to skip to this video. And if the video doesn't work, which it's not going to, Oh. Basically, for time's sake, you guys can just YouTube functional communication training. But basically, it's just providing that communication that they might not necessarily have to request what they need. Video modeling, social stories. I know a lot of us already know how to do this. This is just a reminder. These are really, really useful. If you just want to show a child how to do a simple task, you could do a basic model, a basic video model where you, where I am cleaning up all the toys, and then the child, when we prompt them, all right, we have 2 minutes left, then we're going to clean up. We show them the video, and then they can clean up the toys. Then there's the video self-modeling where they are cleaning up the toys. And then, you know, there's 2 minutes left before we clean up. They watch the video of themselves cleaning up the toys. And then they know what to do. When the timer goes off, they clean up the toys. Point of view modeling is very similar, where you're just doing it from the perspective of the learner. And then video prompting is where you break up the video into multiple steps. If the child cannot watch the whole video and complete all the steps, you break it up into smaller steps and you do several videos to prompt them through the whole task. All right, last thing is the task analysis. And this is just laying out, very similar to that visual structure, that visual schedule, just laying out all of the steps that are needed for something. So, simple tasks can be difficult. Someone washing their hands can be difficult. So thinking about the steps to wash their hands. There's quite a few steps. It may seem like the task is, common sense and easy, but to the child, it might not be easy. There are multiple steps that they have to take. So you got to keep in mind their skill level, their age, their communication ability. Are some of the steps, do they need to be taught some of those steps? Sometimes they need to be taught to use the soap. They've never used the soap. They don't use soap at home. They have to learn how to use the soap at school. So task analysis, so also when you're doing a task analysis, there might be 10 steps, but you only require the student to do 8 or 9, and then you help them with the others. So thinking about a task analysis of something that we do. If we wanted to do a task analysis of us planning a trip to Italy, say. If I just told you, okay, you got to go buy a plane ticket, pack your bags, and go. Would you guys all pretty much know how to buy a plane ticket, but think about someone who might not know that. Those 3 tasks just didn't make sense. What do you mean pack a bag? What do I pack? I don't know. So breaking down the task into smaller steps that are meaningful. First, you need to pull up a web browser, or you need to pick up a phone. You need to call a number, and then you need to pick a destination that you want to go to, and then so on and so forth. There's a lot of steps that we tend to leave out in task analysis. So just understanding the function or the age of your child, what they know how to do, and then laying out those steps for them. So you identifying the key target skill, and then the steps that are needed. You collect baseline data to understand what they can do. Maybe they could do steps 1 and 2, but they can't do steps 3 and 4. So teaching them what steps 3 and 4 look like. And then you break the skills into necessary components, and then you teach them how to do those tasks. And then as they do each step, you reinforce them all the way along, and then you fade those reinforcements. All right, and there's another video that we won't have time to watch. you can't see all the things in between, but here's some examples of like arriving to class, and then it lays out how you take your stuff out of your backpack and you put, and then you take your snack out of your lunchbox and you put it in the lunch bin, and you put your lunchbox in a different bin, and then you take your show and tell and put it here. So it just lays out everything for the child. This is changing a hearing aid battery. So just to show that there's 9 different steps in changing a hearing aid battery. You might explain it to me in 3 steps, but for someone who doesn't know how to do it, they might need all 9 steps. And then we were going to practice, but we are out of time. So everything that I said today is stuff that we learn and stuff that we know, but now is actually doing it and using it and thinking about how it can apply to our students. And then if you have student teachers, just relaying that information to them or your coworkers, providing the different resources that you learned. Any questions? All right, you guys are done.